Comic Book Savant, episode 314.
I know this. This I know. All that I have, all that is me, resides inside my poetry. And every time I write a rhyme, it might be the line that sets minds free. And also, I know that I don't...
Welcome to the Comic Book Savant podcast. I'm your host, James Harris. This episode, we're going to do something a little different. I haven't done one of my top 10 episodes in a little while, and I was thinking about topics, and one that came to mind and was about my favorite single comic book issues. I've talked about series, long run, short run, limited, but I've never just talked about my single individual favorite issues of a comic, or one particular issue that just stood out or had a profound effect on me. I posted a question on the Facebook page. Some people responded to it, and it just really got my juices flowing, and I thought it would be a cool episode to talk about my top 10 favorite single issues. And maybe this will give you guys, we're going into the holiday season. A lot of people will have vacation and time off of work. And I thought it'd be cool to kind of throw some of these suggestions out there. I know we have listeners that are all age range and all levels of coming into this comic book culture of ours. Again, I've been reading comics since I was a very young child, and I had a lot of influences from older members in my families that were collectors and handed down comics and stuff to me. So it's kind of my way of maybe suggesting some stuff that might spark your interest, that you might seek out and get the issues, or maybe a trade or something that maybe will spark you in a direction that you wouldn't normally go. The one thing I do love about the whole culture around comics in the community and in the podcast over the years, my reading tastes have changed based on feedback and back and forth that I've had with you guys. And what I read 10, 11 years ago is completely different from what I read now. So that was my hopes, to spark some new reading, new things in your on your reading list with the holidays and stuff coming up. If you have a lot of downtime, you can really read some interesting and different stuff. But before we get into all that, as always, I'd like to give a shout out to my friends at the Comics Podcast Network. You can find them over at comicspodcast.com. It is a great resource if you enjoy this podcast and you're looking for new and interesting podcasts to check out, be it on a particular publisher, a particular team, or individual character. You can find that and more over at the Comics Podcast Network. It has a great portal for just finding comic book related podcasts. There are literally hundreds of different podcasts there for you to browse through and sample to find more shows. Again, I've been a longstanding member of the Comics Podcast Network for as long as I've been doing the show, and it's a great resource if you're in the market for new and more comic book listening material. So definitely, if you have a moment, check out the Comic Podcast Network over at comicspodcast.com. And last but not least, definitely, if you have a moment, check out our sponsor, which is instocktrades.com. It is one of the best places online that you can go get collected editions, omnibus, absolute editions, you name it, they have it. If it's any bound collection when it comes to comics, they have all the Marvel Masterwork editions. They have great deals. You have discounts ranging from 35 to 42 to up to 50% off with their deals of the week. If you place orders $50 or more, and if you're a U.S. customer, you get free shipping within the U.S. If you're an international customer, you can get, you still get the great savings, but you don't get that free shipping because that's only for U.S. customers. But they do have some of the most competitive international rates around, so you still save on the books, and you just have to pay you just will have to pay for your shipping. You don't get that extra bonus, but it's still a great service. So I recommend it to you all. If you have a moment, check out InStockTrades.com. Let them know that you heard about them first on the Comic Book Savant. That would greatly help me out, and I greatly appreciate it. And now to the meat of the episode. Again, this was kind of just a random idea. I always try to give something fresh to you guys, and I've done all different takes of like different top 10s. Like I said, I've talked about short run series, long run series, but I never thought this did a countdown of what my favorite individual issues, the things that stood out. I might talk about an issue here and there, but I never did a countdown list. So I thought this would be a cool thing to share, and it was something I hadn't really thought about. So it actually took a little time to sit down and be like, what are some of these comics that really stood out to me over the years, that really were like books I go back to. So here goes nothing. This is in no particular order at all. This is just basically, I came up with the list of the 10 books, and I listed them for you guys. I'll run through the list and, kind of give you a explanation on why it stood out to me so much. The first one on my list is the Invincible Iron Man Annual 1. This is the Matt Fraction run on the Invincible Iron Man that he did a few years back. The title of the story is Mandarin, The Story of My Life. It's written by Matt Fraction. The artwork was done by Carmine D. Gendemico. The color work is done by Matt Wilson, and the lettering is done by Joe Caramagna. This was a extra oversized annual edition. Since I got rid of all my comics, I had the original comic when I first bought this. I bought it digitally. It's broken up into 3 parts. It's like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. When I initially bought the comic, it was just one oversized, like $5.99, I think, price on it, and it was just one huge story. This basically, this gives great insight to the Mandarin, which the Mandarin is one of villains that I always thought that was a really cool character, even back in the old days. When he was kind of the racist stereotype Chinaman with the Fu Manchu. They evolved his character over the years, and I want to say the first real major artistic kind of change they made to Mandarin came I want to say mid-'80s. It was a crossover event in the comics called Acts of Vengeance, and you kind of saw the Mandarin kind of out of the kooky robes, look like an old sorcerer, to a more contemporary Asian man with a business suit, and he had the 10 rings of magic. So he's kind of this cool Asian dude with a suit would look like brass knuckles on his fist, but they were actually the rings of power. And they kind of modernized the character and took him out of that 70s stereotype and kind of modernized the character. And they kept doing things to refresh him over the years. And Matt Fraction really did a great run on the Invincible Iron Man. And this take was just really going into the psyche of the Mandarin, and like it is a I guess it just shows how deeply disturbed. It's this long, windy tale about, like most villains, the Mandarin is a maniac, and he's ego-hungry, ego-driven. So he gets this top-notch Hollywood writer-director. He kidnaps him and forces him basically to make this massive movie magnum opus on his life, and to basically shine this light on him to be like, to make the public seem that he's the hero, not maybe more so Iron Man. And he tortures this poor director, and I think by the end of the story, it ultimately ends with the Mandarin not being happy with the take this guy does, and he basically just kills him. But it just shows, it goes deep into the different origins that you've learned about the Mandarin over the years, and kind of twists them all around. It's kind of equivalent to The Killing Joke, and how they dive deep into the psyche of the Joker and show these different variants of what could be possible origins of the character. Is one of those type stories, but for the Mandarin over in the Marvel universe. It's really well done. It's a really good read. It's a long read, but it really dives into this character. And it's a character I always had an affinity for, even as a kid. Just in reading various Iron Man comic books, and that being his kind of main foil, to learn all this about him and see this character study done on him in such a way, was really a surprise. I wasn't expecting that to be a story for the annual, but normally annuals are considered like throwaway stories, but I think it's a really important story in your understanding of how dangerous and how disturbed the villain the Mandarin actually is. You know, it's a shame that we never got a chance to see it on the big screen, because it was always something to me that stood out about the Mandarin and that made him cool, with him wielding those rings and each one being a different power and having the mastery to use them. Always just worked for me, and it was a good counterbalance to Stark and his technology, the Mandarin and his magic. But that's what stood out. But this was just a great character study on a character that I feel that is not, as far as villains, is not greatly appreciated. And that's why initially in Iron Man 3, it bothered me so much about that movie, because to me, I felt like they squandered something that could have been a really cool character and a really big threat, like in the Marvel cinematic universe, and they just didn't partake on it, even though they tried to retcon it a little bit with the Return of the King short that they did. I don't think we'll ever see the Mandarin come back anytime soon, unless he pops up in Infinity War. I don't think we'll ever kind of see him back in the cinematic universe, not anytime soon anyway. The next story on my list is New Year's Evil Prometheus. This was a one-shot they did, and it's kind of cool because they're throwing the name out Prometheus in the Arrow television show right now as the main villain that's working behind the scenes on Arrow. We don't know who Prometheus is at this point. I don't know how much I care about the rendition of Prometheus, because as far as everything that I'm seeing at this point, it's a stark contrast from the Prometheus that we know in the DC universe in the comics. The title of the story in this comic is There Was a Crooked Man. And this was late 90s, early 2000s, I think, where, occasionally DC would do really cool things where they would have a themed month, and they did this New Year's Evil, and particular villains that they spotlighted had these one-shots that led into them having an appearance in a particular comic, coming into some kind of prominence. Prometheus was a totally new character, so this one-shot served as his origin story, and then he promptly, in the same month, premiered in a storyline in the Grant Morrison Justice League. So this story, this one-shot, was written by Grant Morrison. The artwork was done by Arnie Jurgensen. The inker was David Meekus. Colors was done by James Sinclair, and lettering was done by Janice Shang. And this was a really good, again, also a character study. I keep, the theme so far, but it was a great character study on this new character, seeing you see basically his origins and how, his parents were career criminals, that took him around on their crazy heist and stuff for years. So he had no choice but to kind of turn out to be a bad guy or a crooked man or crooked person. His parents were gunned down in front of him. He was put into, he's taken into custody, foster homes and things of that nature. But again, his parents were career criminals that took him around and taught him to trade. So it was only to be expected that he continued in the family business. But again, you see he amasses a fortune. His parents had put away money for him, and he used the connections that his parents had built over the years to the underworld. He basically taught himself to become a superior type criminal, similar, I guess, in contrast to a Batman, where he went the world, trained the world to learn how to be an assassin, to be a master thief, and came across a mystical key that took him into this dimension where he learned how to utilize technology and these powers to become Prometheus. The thing that I really thought that was cool about Prometheus is that he had this like helmet that he had these little discs that he could have information and basically like kind of Matrix wise, like put these discs into his helmet and it would, the information would download directly into his brain and he can learn, multiple things similar to kind of how they uploaded data to Neo and the different people in the Matrix. It's based on a kind of that similar theory. And then he had this cool like nightstick anvil weapon that had like magical properties to it. So he was a very interesting character, really cool visual character, how they designed the character. But basically this is all set up. You get his backstory, why he's a bad guy. He wants to prove himself, and to prove himself, he feels the only way he can do that is by taking down the Justice League single-handedly. He concocts this public contest for, if you want to be a superhero, you could go meet the Justice League, and he picks this guy to win that's like an actor, just not really trying to be a hero, but he has the physique, and he sets up a place to meet him, and he basically kills him and takes his place and goes in, and that runs into the Justice League storyline where he basically single-handedly takes down the Justice League. He's a really cool character. I lost track of the character. I think maybe they even popped him into Batman at one point. I got to do I didn't do any follow-up research to kind of be like where the Prometheus character is. I don't think I've seen anything in the comics coming out of the New 52 with him or since then, but that doesn't mean it's not so, because we know how my reading goes with the current books. So I'm not quite sure what his status is now. So it's kind of interesting that the new foil on the Arrow TV show happens to be Prometheus, though he's a less techie version. So it's interesting to see will this tie into this character that just so happens to have the same name, or is it going to be a totally different character that just by default they have, just by coincidence they have the same name? So that'll be interesting to see. The third comic on my list is Star Wars Legacy. This was a series that was really, really good, that was done by Dark Horse. Now we know that Disney owns Marvel, and Marvel has all the rights to all the back catalog of the Dark Horse stuff. So you can find this book. To find it in the comic shop could be hard. I rebought this digitally. I didn't realize I had bought the when all the rights reverted over to Marvel, they put out the whole series digitally. I never finished Star Wars Legacy, and if you go back many, many episodes, I was a big fan, and I reviewed individual issues way back in the day in early Comic Book Savant, like way back in the 30s and episode like 30, 40, 50, somewhere around there. This was a real good series that was going on, like I said, over at Dark Horse. It was set 100 years after Return of the Jedi. All this stuff now is considered legacy, or what is it called? Legends, Legends, in how the whole continuity is set up now with when Disney bought Lucasfilms and stuff. But this here was, at the time, the concept was so novel because, it was the first kind of stories that were, set that far in the future. It was a really cool series, and I've done episodes where I've actually talked about the series itself. It tied back into the Skywalkers. Again, all this stuff is now legends, and it's not in continuity, but it tied in directly to Luke and Anakin. It tied into Clone Wars. It tied in. They did a really good job. This particular story was called Noob, And it was written by John Ostrander. The artwork was done by Travel Foreman. The color work was done by Brad Anderson, and the lettering was done by Michael David Thomas. And basically, the cool thing about Legacy is that it had the main storyline that dealt with the ancestor of the Skywalkers. But this particular issue, they would do an arc and take a break. And they would do like these great one-off standalone stories. And this one was basically following a day in a life in a stormtrooper. He was fresh out of the academy. It's warring going on. And you see him coming into the Joker squad, if I remember correctly. And this how he, is acclimated to this small elite group of stormtroopers that went into this section. They were undermanned, but they were like the best. And you see the harshness of war as you go through the issue. You get to know the individual characters of the Joker team and their different backgrounds and their motivation. And these are not stormtroopers that were brainwashed. These are just live humans that decided that they wanted to side for the Empire and be a stormtrooper. You hear about the noob that we're following in the story, where the story is being told through his eyes, where he was like, it was a legacy thing for him. His father was a stormtrooper, so it was to be expected. And they explain, like, in a hierarchy in this future where if your parents served as a stormtrooper, it was a legacy thing where you could be assigned to the same regiment or whatever they were, but he decided that he wanted to go a different route and be in this Joker squad. And you see just how quickly things crumble and how people, what choices it goes when people pick a side to be on in war and the consequences, of it. It's a really just great one-off issue. I know it's an issue in Star Wars that recently came out that did a similar concept, but it was done here first. That a lot of people, I heard a lot of buzz about. I can't remember what issue it is, and I haven't read up to that point in Star Wars yet, so I can speak on it later after I read it. But this was done here first and was really original, really down gritty. Issue. It just always stood out to me because it made me care for the first time, care about and think about stormtroopers as actually people, not clones or not pawns, but actual people inside those suits. So I thought that was most effective, and John Ostrander did a great job with the dialogue in the issue and just the conflict itself. It's really, really good. So definitely you can get it on Comixology because I just recently bought it. So you can get it for about $1.99. Probably going to be the easiest way to get it, because to find that in the comic shop, you would have to do some deep diving for Volume 1 of Star Wars Legacy and to find that fourth volume, because it's a one-off issue. It doesn't have anything to do with the main storyline. And when I didn't even realize this because, like I said, I bought the series, the digital, not omnibus, but the trades that they first released, and I found out what they did in those releases. They have since did like the Ultimate Epic Collection, Marvel released digitally, and I think in print as well. The Ultimate or the Epic Collection, if you want the whole series, if you want to go back and check out Star Wars Legacy, keep in mind the Epic Collection has all the issues. The original collection that they did only has the main storyline. They don't include these one-off issues, and they had quite a few in the run of the series. The series ran about 50 some odd issues, and then it had a post-series mini-series that came out that kind of was the end cap to the whole Volume 1 storyline. And those are included in the regular collection, but the Epic Collection has everything, even the one-off, one-shot issues like issue 4 was. So be mindful of that, or you can search for the individual issue on Comixology and find the Star Wars Legacy issue 4 and buy it. I think, like I said, it's like $1.99 or something like that. So it's not mega expensive, probably cheaper than what you might find it if you try to search down a hard copy. So you can grab it, read it, and see how cool a story it is for sure. Next one for me is, what if the Punisher what if the Punisher's family hadn't been killed? And this is from What If issue 10. This is an old Marvel series. They've reworked the series so much over the years. It was never a consistent book that came out month after month. They would do runs where it did. In the 80s, this is one of the first single issues I ever picked up off a spinning rack. That's why it resonates to me. And I remember I always had an affinity for the Punisher because I just always thought visually he was a stunning character with the skull on his chest. And you always saw him, in action, like guns blazing. And I'll never forget the cover for this book. He was standing on a mantle in a house. The lights were out, and all you could see is the guns blaring, and the lights from the guns blaring out, the flare from the guns, the flash, and you to see him gritting his teeth and just killing a bunch of people, shooting up a bunch of people. So this was a series Marvel would do. It this went out of production. I don't know, it would take hiatuses, and I think it finally finished sometime in the mid-2000s. I have another What If one, which is actually the final issue that I'm going to talk about of that series, but this was issue 10. Again, this came out in the mid-80s, because I think I was about 9 or 10 when I bought this. And the actual title is the story is the Punisher's family hadn't been killed in Central Park. So basically, in the original origin of the Punisher, his family was killed in Central Park on a picnic. They saw something they shouldn't that involved the mob, and they got gunned down in Central Park. Here is a twist. What if? And this was always cool, where they took origins or storylines that was hugely tied into a particular character and said, what if this happened instead of that? I'm going to get to that in a second. This was written by Doug Murray. Artwork was done by Rick Levins. The inker was Bob McLeod. Color was done by Tom Vincent. And lettering was done by Phil Felix. And this was a really cool series back in the day. Like I said, and it ran pretty consistently. I don't think it was a monthly comic. It was like every other month or what have you. It took a big hiatus, like in the 80s to like the 90s, early 2000s. They brought it back. They brought it back in the 2000s for a while. Then it finally ended with another book that's on the list, and it made it 114 issues. But this was only issue 10, so this was very early in the run. So basically, they turned the origin of the Punisher on its ear. Kinda. And I mean kind of, where his family still ended up dying. But it took a different path, where basically they didn't die then. He became a police officer to, kind of help. He ran into corruption on the police force. He didn't want to take bribes. And because of that, he was considered a threat. And they came to his home and killed his family. So his family still died. He still felt responsible. He still became the Punisher to tackle, corruption. So he still became the same character. His family, he still had the tragic end of losing his family. But it just was more linked to his personal choices, because he chose not to be a dirty cop, and his partner happened to be a dirty cop. So that was a problem when he wasn't going to take. So they decided to try to assassinate him, and it failed miserably, because they all ended up dying, and he still became, the Punisher. But you still had he still suffered that tragic loss of his losing his family. Next one on my list, and that would be super hard to find. You could do searches on the internet for What If issue 10 or What If the Punisher hadn't been killed. I could not find this issue. I no longer have the physical copy. And it took a while. I had to do a lot of research online, like trying to find the title. And I actually even found, I don't have the link to it anymore. If I still have it, I'll put it on the posting on the website when I post this episode. It's someone, I don't know if this is a good thing to say, but they had a Tumblr page that basically had the whole story there that we could actually read and check it out, because this is a hard to find one. Like I said, this was What If was never this money-making, super popular series. It was just a fun series that Marvel did, and they did a lot of experimental books like in the 70s and 80s like that you don't see around anymore. And that actually is a segue leading into my next book on my list, which is Marvel Fanfare number 15. The title of the story is That Night. So I guess I need to explain, because some of you might be listening, never heard of Marvel Fanfare. Marvel Fanfare was like an anthology series that Marvel just threw out randomly. It had no consistent publishing schedule per se, but it would just be an anthology where it was just short stories where I guess maybe different artists and writers wanted to work on different series, that they would give them space to kind of here, you want to tell this story, and this story happened to be about the Fantastic Four. It's one of my first exposures to Barry Windsor Smith, which is a legendary artist and creator, and this story is a story he told. It's basically a story between Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm. And I've always, and as you guys, if you've been long-time listeners, know I love team books, and Fantastic Four, especially in the 80s and the heyday, and the John Byrne run, on this series. Really loved this book growing up as a kid. So I always loved Johnny Storm. Always thought he was cool with the flame on and the thing, it's clobbering time. And, they have this love-hate kind of relationship. And this Barry Windsor Smith did the art, inked this story. And the lettering's done by Jim Novak. And basically, it is the Thing's birthday. And if you, over the years, he's grown up, but, basically in the early 80s, Johnny Storm was, still like teenager going into young adulthood kind of. So he's really a bad jokester and prankster, and he always went after the Thing really hard, and they loved each other a lot, but they could fight each other in a second. And this was like a true breakdown of like their friendship and their brothership, even though they're not blood brothers, where, the Human Torch, Johnny Storm, just sets all these traps up for Ben all around the Kirby building, or the, what is it called? Wherever, the Baxter building. And from waking him up first thing in the morning, he sets all these little traps. Like he makes them pancakes, and like they shoot out everywhere, so he's covered in pancakes and syrup, and the visuals are just stunning. Like I said, if you're not familiar with Barry Windsor Smith, like look up his work. He's a master. And this is just so well drawn, and it's so colorful. It's they use premium stock or glossy pages on this, and the inking is wonderful to it. The colors are so vibrant and bright. That always stood out to me, and it's just so cool. You see like the scene with all the pancakes all over the Thing, and you see the syrup dripping all over him. It's just awesome visual. And he says, "I'm gonna get you, Johnny." It's just such a fun little story. But like I said, the Marvel Fanfare was like anthology series where they just did these cool stories where people, like, they were just one-off little short stories. I think this was one of 2 or maybe 3 stories. This was the longest. This took up most of the issue in this particular issue, and it just always stood out to me. This is another one that's super hard to find. I think I found a picture of the cover after a lot of Googling. I found the cover of it, but could not find the actual issue, not digitally. I looked through Comixology, and because, like I said, these were offshoot. These weren't huge money makers. They probably didn't have huge print runs. So if you don't have them like in your possession, they could be kind of hard to find. Maybe you can find this at a comic shop. Maybe. Again, this was published in the early to mid 80s. good little, just a good story, just fun. It just takes me back to my childhood reading it, and just how fun and how it just made me laugh out loud as a kid, and just pure joy of being a comic fan. It's one of those comic issues that just takes me back to that point in my life where things were so much simpler as a little, like 8 or 9 year old kid when this came out, and just having fun with a comic. Next one for me would be Thor issue 3, and this is the Thor Marvel series coming after when the book was relaunched with J. Michael Straczynski and Oliver Coipel. The title of this issue is Everything Old is New Again. The inker is Mark Morales. The colorist is Laura Martin. And I got to see her once at Heroes Con. She did a demonstration on her do the process she used to do her color work was simply amazing. She is one of the best, and that was years ago when I saw that demonstration, and she's become like one of the go-to people at Marvel for like their big books. This was still around this time frame actually when I met her. Around this time this book came out, and lettering done by Chris Iliopoulos. This issue always stands out because I've been a huge Thor fan my whole life. I grew up in the 80s primarily. Thor was an essential part of my childhood in comics. You guys know that I'm a huge fan of I'm going blank. Of the 80s run. Not Ostrander, but I'm going blank. But anyway, of the 80s run of Thor, it was very influential to me. And over the years, they've kind of had watered down Thor leading up to this point. So it was cool seeing John Michael Straczynski's run, because it reinvigorated the character. Ragnarok had taken place, Avengers Disassembled had happened, Thor was out of the comic scene for a few years. They were bringing him back strong. This was a very significant issue for one main reason. During Civil War, the time that Civil War happened, Thor was not around. Ragnarok had happened. None of the Asgardians were around. We had the whole incident in Civil War where Tony had made a Thor clone. He had some of Thor's hair. He made a clone of him. The clone went crazy and killed Goliath. Well, this was kind of the issue that the Day of Reckoning came. Of course, Thor had been back. He had found out about the events of Civil War and what was done, and he wasn't too happy to find out that Tony had been holding on to a piece of his hair and more or less to defile a god by cloning a god, and then he killed someone that Thor considered a friend. And they have this one-on-one battle, and they just showed how powerful Thor was. Thor almost killed Iron Man, from an inch of his life. He just beats him down and cracks his armor, and you just is like, I could kill you right now, but he holds off, and he just flies off, and he leaves him there with his suit totally powerless, hanging on by a thread. It's just, the visuals are powerful. Oliver Coipel, his artwork is stunning. That dude can just flat out draw. And just the dialogue back and forth, and JMS is like a mastermind in that, for real. So it just pops. It just is such a where this friendship that was considered a friendship for so long, it is definitely fractured. In that you see in the visuals depicted on the page that that Thor could have really killed him for being so disrespectful to him, that it was a painful thing, and he was very angry, but he composed himself and left him, there to kind of think about what he has done. And it changes the Thor Iron Man relationship for a while. But it's a powerful issue. It always stands out to me with the visuals and just the dialogue between the two characters, of Tony trying to explain himself, Thor not really trying to hear it, and Thor just being so angry that he almost loses control and kills this man for the damage he kind of caused by making this clone of him. The next book that I want to talk about is The Walking Dead, issue 100, Image Skybound, written by Robert Kirkman, artwork done by Charlie Adler, inkers Stefano Giordano, Gray Tones Cliff Rathburn, and lettering done by Russ Wooten. What can I say about this? This has been such a controversial topic just based off the season finale of last year on The Walking Dead and the season premiere this year. This was a very significant issue for me. Probably when I read this issue initially, when it came out like 5-6 years ago, at least 5 years ago now in the comics. It was totally mind-blowing, jaw-dropping. I think it's one of the 2 times where I literally read a Walking Dead comic book and something, when I flipped the page, totally made my jaw drop. And this was one of those moments that I've experienced in my time reading The Walking Dead. Seeing the spoiler alert if you have not read the comic or have watched the TV show, where the character Glenn gets his head bashed in by Negan and Lucille. Again, just when you initially see it, you don't expect it to happen. He had been such a long-standing character in the comics as well as in the show, so you didn't see it coming. It's shocking. It totally changed the tone of the comic from that point on. And, it remains to be seen on the television show. So far, they've handled it with the same amount of gravitas that it warrants, but it's only been like 3 episodes since that premiere, so where we saw the death of the character happen. So time will ultimately tell how effectively it transfers over to TV from in the comics, but in the comics it had an everlasting effect on the comic that still resonates to this day. 50 some odd issues later, it still resonates. The next book is What If? Secret Wars 25 years later, issue 114, Marvel, which actually was the final issue of What If. The title of this story is called Brave New World. It was written by J. Ferber, if I think I pronounced that correctly. Artwork done by Greg Siegel. Ink work done by Jose Marzan Jr. Color work is done by Paul Tutrone, and lettering done by Chris Eliopoulos. Again, this was the final What If issue. I remember seeing this. I was in a comic shop, and I just happened to, it caught my eye because it was kind of had a very bright cover to it. And Secret Wars is a nostalgic point for me because it was considered the first crossover ever in comics that Marvel did in the mid-'80s. And I remember reading the issues. It was significant in so many ways. It was considered the first event or crossover. The comics kind of paused for a year, and they did this 12-issue series where all these heroes and villains were taken to this battle world by this alien creature called the Beyonder, and they were on this battle world and they fought out. So Secret Wars was significant for so many reasons. We got Spider-Man in a black suit, which later became Venom. From this, we had the epic scene where they show the Hulk holding up a mountain, literally. It was some really cool stuff that happened in that not mini or limited series or what have you at the time, and it's the father of the event comic, basically. What we know today as the event comic that we have way too many of. But this was the birth of it. But what was cool about this is that this is a what if the heroes and the villains never went back to Earth, and that they were stuck on Battle World, and that the fighting stopped to some extent. Some heroes paired together and had children, and some villains paired together and had children, and then some heroes got with villains and they had children. So it's a very unique world. They did a cool animated movie. I think the next Avengers of Tomorrow. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. I don't know why I didn't put the clip in there, but it did an animated movie that kind of piggybacked off this whole idea and concept, which was kind of cool. This shows the kids kind of banding together and becoming the next Avengers on this world. They eventually do some time travel and they go to another alternate reality. It's just like a cool nostalgic story. It was just kind of cool seeing it come full circle. With me being a little kid reading Secret Wars at the tender age of like I said, about probably 9, 10, 11 years old, and seeing like 25 years later and them having kids and them like then going on to be like the next Avengers. And it was so cool that they even thought strongly enough the concept that they actually did an animated movie, which is it's a good movie. It takes some beats from this and then some original stuff, but it gives you that same nostalgic kind of vibe that you get from reading this comic. It was the very last issue, which was a standout as well. It was very well written, very well drawn, just a fun issue. Like I said, it took me back to a point, in my childhood of reading the original book, original series, and then seeing this like kind of as a neat end cap to it all. So I really enjoyed it. Next book on my list is Robin, issue 156, DC Comics. The title of the issue is The High Dive. This was written by Adam Beecham and artwork's done by Freddie E. Williams II. Colorist is Guy Major, and lettering's done by Phil Balsman. And this issue stood out to me because it had a purpose to it. It dealt with the issue of teen suicide and not necessarily bullying, but mainly teen suicide. Adam Beecham and Freddie Williams II had a nice little run on, I guess maybe like 20 issue run, like 2 year and a half run on Robin. About 10 years ago or so, 8 years ago. I don't know. Time goes by so fast now. They had a nice little run. It was something fresh. Adam Beecham did some really good issues just based on the teen condition. He focused on that Robin outside of the costume was a teen, and he had real life, issues, and a lot of stuff, excuse me, had transpired in the comic with Tim Drake. He dealt with loss with losing his father and stepmother, team members from the Teen Titans, some situations that went awry that hurt his friends that he had in school and in real life around him, and he was having a very rough time dealing. And in the process of him dealing and questioning himself and kind of falling into a seriously dangerous state of depression, he sees another kid that's getting ready to jump, and how he talks him down, and it serves a dual purpose because it's not just in him being the superhero in this mask, being Robin, trying to save this person. He's eventually saving himself because he's thinking about the advice that he's giving to him, and he just could just as much be on that ledge as the other guy. So in helping him, he kind of helps himself, and it ends where, he's telling the guy that it's probably people that you feel comfortable with, that you can sit down and talk to, and you don't have to end your life. It's people that care about you that you can talk to. And as he's telling him that, you see at the end of the issue, he sits down and he calls Nightwing, and he talks to him. So he takes his own advice. So it has this dual, meaning. It's just a very powerful, issue of a comic. But it's so very well done, and it's very grounded and realistic. And I think it could help people. A lot of people suffer from depression and don't think there are people that care. So if you ever just come across someone, if you can find this issue in print, digital, whatever, it's just a very powerful comic. Very, very powerful. Like, it resonates to this day. I read it at the time. I was like, it really was like at the time, like the best single issue I read that year. And it still resonates now because it's still very pertinent now. That is teen suicide is still a huge problem. And this was done, like I said, it wasn't forced. It was just a natural issue, and it tied in what was going on with the hero at the time. And like I said, it served a dual purpose, because where even Tim Drake was at that point, you might have seen him push to the edge, and where he might wanted to commit suicide himself. But then, because he's a hero and he sees this and talking the person down, he's talking himself down at the same time. Just really powerful stuff. So definitely check that out. And last but not least, my last top 10 favorite single issues would be JLA issue 8, DC Comics. This is from the Grant Morrison run. The title of the story is Imaginary Stories. Written by Grant Morrison, artwork done by Oscar Jimenez. Inker is Chip Wallace. Colorist is Pat Gari. And lettering is done by Ken Lopez. What stands out in this issue, this was like a little 2-part story, if I'm not mistaken, issues 8 and 9 of the Grant Morrison's JLA run. And what was cool about this issue, the villain was the key. And he kind of came in and subdued the whole Justice League and had them induced in these crazy dream realities, alternate realities. And he had all them subdued, hooked up to these machines, and was no one around except for Green Arrow's son. At the time in the comics, the Green Arrow Oliver Queen was dead in the comics at the time. You find out that he had a son that grew up like in a monastery that came into they introduced into the DC universe. He was still very new, very green, but he was... I made it funny. He was very green. You get it? Green Arrow, green. And he's the only one left around to kind of bail the Justice League out. He doesn't really know them. They don't know much of him. He's all alone versus the Key and his robots. And it was really, at the time, I was always I love my Archers. I love Hawkeye. I love Clint Barton. And I love Oliver Queen, Green Arrow. I did not really take to, what was his name? Connor Hawk, if I want to say is correct. I really didn't take to him well when they try to kind of force him into the DC universe at the time. I was still pretty new to the DC universe, so I didn't even like the fact that I learned that Oliver Queen was dead, but to then give me his kid, and he just seemed so in stark contrast to what Oliver was. But it was really cool because this issue in particular, in the 2 issues itself, kind of set the stage and made me like him for the character he is. He wasn't Oliver. He was his own Green Arrow. And I ended up really liking the character and ended up collecting his series that they had going on at the time. It drew me into the character, and I rather enjoyed him for who and what he was. In the comics, but this was the issue that turned that all around and made me like the character. A lot of cool character beats. It was cool. Another thing Morrison showed in depth in these different dream sequences they were in. Like Batman had a son. His son had went on to be Robin. He married Selena Kyle, and they had Bruce Jr. It was like just cool little tidbits like that was sprinkled throughout. But it was really the center of the story was really us getting familiar with this new Green Arrow and showing that he could fill the mantle that was established by his father more than anything. So that was really what I pulled out of the comic and what goes back. And it's like, that's the comic whenever I see it. That's like, that made me like the Connor Green Arrow. So that's my top 10 list. Like I said, it's just suggestions put out there on books that I went back and thought about that had some type of effect on me that are still resonates at this time for me as just individual issues that stand out. I could have had a ton more, but these are just the ones that I put together in this list for you guys. Again, to maybe, give you some suggestions. I would like to, hear what you guys have to say about some of your favorite issues. It can be 1, it can be your top 10, it can be your top 5, whatever. You can always, hit me up. You can tweet me. Again, I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram. I deleted my Snapchat because I just couldn't get into Snapchat. Instagram is a little bit better. Twitter is a little bit better. And I also, like I said, it's the also have the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/comic book savant, and the website. So, I want to funnel you guys more so to the Facebook page because we can have we can interact back and forth. You guys can post stuff up there. I've been posting little suggestions, things, and little topics and things on there. So that's one place that you can go if you want to contact me very easily. Or you can always email me through the website, which is comicbooksavant.com. If you go to the Contact Us page, there's a form there. You can communicate or send a message right through there and give me your top 10 list, give me your top 1, whatever. Just all the interaction always is just cool to interact with you guys and see kind of what suggestions or what your favorite stuff is. So again, hit me up on those avenues. That's all I have for you guys this week. As always, check out InStockTrades.com. Check out the Comic Podcast Network. I will see you guys again next week for another episode of Comic Book Savant. You guys take care.
And into lyrical wholeness. And I know this. This I know.